Hey, my name's Jonathan Hadel and I make music as Pink Buddha. About a year ago, I put up a class on Skillshare that went through how I create a master template in Ableton Live. I've included the first 2 chapters here in this video so you can watch it and get a feel for it. And if you use the link that's in the description below, you get 2 free months with Skillshare, and you can watch this class and some other ones that I have, and in fact any of the other classes that they have on Skillshare by that link. And if you're one of those people who'd rather take the template that I did in the class and then tweak it for your own needs rather than build it from scratch, in the description is a link for how you can download that. Okay, so without further ado, here's the first 2 chapters you can check out. Hi, my name's Jonathan Hadel and I'm a composer and a musician. And I've been using Ableton Live for about 7 years now. And in this class, I'm going to show you how I've created a master template to make my writing more efficient and more organized. And what I'm going to show you is the product of many years of tweaking, not only from my own personal use, but from any other good ideas that I come across. And we're going to recreate this template step by step so that you have a working template in the end, but I'm also going to explain thoroughly the reasons behind why I'm setting it up that way. Because invariably, as you go along, you're going to want to change it to make it more workable for yourself. And understanding the reasons and the strategy behind what I'm showing you will help you continually refine your own template over the years. When creating a template from scratch, I like to start with summing channels, or some people refer to them as bus channels. Your master track is kind of like the ocean, and the summing channels or the bus channels are like the major rivers that lead into there. Then we're going to set up all the individual tracks, which will be like smaller rivers. Your audio is going to start in these individual channels. Then it funnels into the summing channels or the buses, and then into the master channel. Alright, so let's set up the summing channels. I'm going to add 3 more tracks up here, audio tracks. I'm going to make them all the same color so that I can recognize them easily. And I like to create 4 different summing channels. One is for the lead, which could be lead part or lead vocals. The next is the main body, then bass, and finally drums. Summing channels are what I use to help in the mixing process. I'm usually using multiple different drum tracks or bass sounds or guitars or keyboards, and all those are going to be funneling in and consolidating here in these summing channels. You can then go to each one of these tracks and turn off the input. So I'm going to select all of them and set this to no input. There is going to be an input, but it's going to come internally, not from one of your audio inputs or from a MIDI channel. The last thing I put in there is a track that I'm just going to use as a spacer. I color it white so that I can recognize it, change the name on it just to be a few dashes. I turn off the input and then I make it really small. I insert this prior to the other ones, and this is just simply for organizational purposes, so that I got a little bit of space between my summing channels and the individual tracks. In Session View, I also go through and change this so that I remove all the stop buttons and shrink it down so it doesn't just take up very much real estate. Again, this is just purely aesthetic. I just like a little bit of visual space there to help me find my way around. Now, some people might argue that you don't need summing channels when you have the ability to group different tracks together. And that's certainly one way to do it. But the reason that I don't do that is when it comes to mixing, it's a lot easier to keep the summing tracks together, and I'll show you that later. And the other reason is if you're using an APC or a push or a launchpad and you group tracks together, it creates another column, and for me, that makes it harder to navigate using those kind of devices to control Ableton. So I don't group tracks together until the end. But that's just a personal preference, so there's no real wrong way to use Ableton, it's just however you choose. Now that we've set up the master track and the summing channels, I recommend putting in channels for your audio. And this might be kind of at minimum, one for each audio track that you have in your interface. But also you could set some up based upon the sort of audio tracks that you tend to record, whether that be guitar, voice, piano, or any other outboard instrument. For the purposes of this class and this demonstration, I'm just going to create 4 audio inputs. And I'm going to move these to the front. From an organizational standpoint, I always like to put my lead part, whether that be vocal or another instrument, right at the top. And then other audio tracks might be backing vocals, guitar, maybe acoustic guitar, maybe an electric guitar. Oops, I didn't mean to create an extra track there. I'll leave it anyways. My recommendation is to create as many audio tracks as you might possibly need. The reason for this is I find it's a lot faster and easier to simply go into your template and delete the tracks that you're not going to be using for that particular song than to open a new session and have to add more tracks because you want to add another part. Now that we've created the audio tracks, let's assign the audio. Now that we've set up the inputs, let's set up the outputs. I'll take my lead track here and send that to the lead summing channel. The other ones, the background track, backing vocals, the acoustic guitar, electric guitar, I'm going to send all these to the body track, which is kind of, I just use the word body to stand for the bulk of the parts and instruments that are not the lead or the bass line or the drums, just kind of everything else. You could call it main or another name if you want. And lastly, I'm going to take this bass guitar and send it to the bass track. If you have drums that you're recording live, put those in there too. Again, just for the purposes of this template, I'm trying to show you the main concept, not necessarily make one that's specific to your studio. You're going to need to customize that for yourself. If you're like most Ableton users, you're probably using MIDI tracks as well. So let's go ahead and insert a couple of those. Again, I'm going to slide those over in front of our summing channels. So now I recommend creating a number of different tracks based upon the ones that you more often tend to use, whether that be keyboards or pads or bass lines, because it's always easy to just go through and delete the ones you don't need for a particular song that you want to work on. For the purposes of this illustration, I'll create a few in here, which will just be like a pad, maybe a synth, then synth bass, keys, and drums. I usually always use a number of different drum racks, so I'll go ahead and duplicate the drums here so that we have another track. Now that we put all those in, let's assign the outputs. Now you can't really assign the audio outputs until there's an instrument in there, so I'll go ahead and put some instruments in there already. Feel free to put in some of your favorites just to give you a place to start with. Okay, now that there's an instrument in each MIDI track, we can adjust the output. So I'm going to take the pad, I'm going to put that into the body summing channel. I'm going to go to the synth bass, and I'm going to stick that into the bass channel. The keys I can put into body, and the drums are obviously going into the drum bus. Now that we have some of these out here to work with, let's talk about some organizational things. I like to take this spacer track and insert that before each instrumental group, whether that be the drums, vocal parts, and then the other instrument groups. You can obviously put that wherever you want to. This is just how I organize it. Again, the goal is just to make it easier to look at, especially if you have a number of tracks going on. The other thing that I like to do is to make them color coordinated. You can, of course, pick whatever colors you like, but I tend to always make the lead vocals pink And then I make backing tracks or other ones like that, like a lighter color pink. So it's still within the same family of color, but it's distinctive from the lead part. Maybe I'll make that even a little bit lighter like this. I'll make all the pads, move the bass guitar and the synth bass together, move the keys over. I'll make these all kind of in the green family. And then I'm going to make my basses to be more purple. I might even just put a little spacer there between the bass and the body parts here. And then I always do my drums in blue. Again, there's no reason that I chose these particular colors, but if I keep it consistent, it helps with my visual organization. I also like to play with the sizing of tracks to help with that organization. So I'm going to take these summing tracks, which aren't really going to have any information in them, and I'm going to remove all the stop buttons from them and shrink them down to be a little bit smaller. The other thing that you're going to need to do on the summing channels is to change the monitor to in. Otherwise, when you sum the audio into those buses, you won't be able to hear it. I also then go over to the arrange view and adjust the sizing there as well. So I'm going to select all my summing channels and I'm going to shrink those down a little bit as well. Okay, so now let's add some return tracks. Now I personally don't use very many return tracks. Typically just have a general reverb that I might use and a delay, possibly another kind of reverb. Some people use these heavily. I personally don't use them that often because I have a lot of RAM on my computer, so I just put the effects on the individual tracks. But it is a great way to save on CPU usage if you need that. Again, I like to play with the sizing on these return tracks to make them a little smaller and also make them all one color. All right, so those are the first 2 chapters. And like I said before, if you want 2 free months of Skillshare, where you can watch the rest of this for free and some other videos that I have, as well as anybody else who's got videos on Skillshare, use the link in the description for that.